Доброго дня. Вітаю.
Good afternoon, and I welcome you all to the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, and we start our roundtable on the experience of measuring local self-governance performance, and it is implemented by DOBRE, Decentralization for Better Results and Efficiency program, and it is funded by the USAID. And today we welcome the following speakers in the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center: Vitaliy Bezgin, MP of Ukraine; Vyacheslav Negoda, Deputy Minister for Communities and Territories Development; Valentina Poltavets, Executive Director of Association of Amalgamated Territorial Communities; Igor Abramyuk, the Director of Ukrainian Association of Communities; Mr. Tartychka, Head of Kyiv-Mogily School of Governance. And also we have here speakers from other cities. We are going to hear two speakers from the US. Because of time difference, they could not join us live. So on the eve of our event, they recorded a video address. This is Barry Reed, DOBRE Program Chief of Party and consultant, and Ilire Agimi, Democracy and Governance Specialist. We will also hear online Roman Lozynskyi, the MP of Ukraine; Norbert Pils, Country Coordinator of Helvetia Swiss Intercooperation Kosovo; Cezary Trutkovsky, Chairman of the Executive Board of Foundation in Support of Local Democracy Poland; and Lyudmila Bilakos, Deputy Head of Novoukrayinska Consolidated Community; and Natalia Shafaros, Head of Department of Energy Management, Municipal Initiatives and Investments of Bashtanska Consolidated Community. We are streamed on DOBRE Program, Decentralization and Ukrainian Crisis Media Center Facebook and the Crisis Media Center YouTube channel, and you can listen to it in Ukrainian and English. And our audience can ask questions when they view these broadcasts, and we will refer them to our speakers. So let's start our discussion today. So why we decided to organize this roundtable? Recently, when coordinating the administrative and territorial structure, and there have been a lot of discussions on capacities of amalgamated communities. And as debates, they refer to different indicators: size, number of population, number of children, and the endeavor was to set the minimal levels to ensure capacity of the communities. But amalgamation of communities, that was just one step towards, in the framework of the decentralization reform. One of the objectives of the reform is to develop effective governance, local governance, and to improve services provided to the residents. So will the newly amalgamated communities be effective, and how will they provide effective services, and how to support and measure this efficacy or performance? We'll discuss that today. Let us start with the welcome address by Barry Reed. He was head of our program, chief of party for 4 years, but recently he changed his status and now he is program consultant. So now let's hear him.
Dobre Rodnya Vsim. I am honored and delighted to welcome you to today's roundtable on measuring local self-government performance, Ukrainian and foreign experience. With the conclusion of the amalgamation process, Ukraine now needs to move towards consolidating the decentralization process and the overall system of local self-government. Ukraine has an amazing opportunity with the completion of amalgamation. You can develop and implement a way to determine how the local self-governance system functions, how you can determine what the system needs and why, and generate useful data for future decision-making about decentralization and local self-government. Performance measurement is the key to developing an excellent, high-quality, and modern local governance system. Let me quickly highlight some of the benefits. For local government, you can see where you do well and where you need to improve. The system will help you improve allocating your resources and determining your priorities more efficiently. Citizens can also see this in their local government. They can also more easily express their priorities on where to concentrate local government resources. Performance measurement is also a tool to bring citizens and their local government closer. For the Ministry of Communities and Territorial Development and other ministries, you can see areas of strengths and weaknesses throughout the system. It will allow you to target assistance and resources where you see demonstrated needs and steer resources to high performers as an incentive to keep improving. Not based on guesses, but based on data and actual results. For the Verkhovna Rada, you can also see how the system functions, its strengths and weaknesses. You can use this actual experience and results to determine any needed legislative steps to strengthen and improve the overall local governance system. Moreover, performance measurement offers a way to truly determine capability of local governments. In the future, in Ukraine, 3 or 4 years from now, you may need again to consider whether you have the optimal number of local governments. The indicators you used to finish the amalgamation process did not measure capability. They were simple norms. Local governments could protest because no one could say Hromada A is capable and will survive, while Hromada B is not capable and needs further amalgamation. The development and implementation of performance measurement will give you the data to make such difficult decisions. Objective facts and results from the local governments themselves will determine what capability is. Now, it requires work to design, develop, and implement a performance management system. It also takes broad stakeholder involvement, all levels of government, interested civil society, and key decision makers throughout the system, bottom to top, must participate to create the best possible system. It will take time and effort, but I have seen such systems work and yield far more results than the effort involved to create them. When you start to work with good performance management system and the data it provides, you will be surprised to find all of the different ways you can use this data in the system. And you are not alone. USAID, through DOBRE, stands ready to assist you. We've talked to other donors. Other donors also are ready to support you in this effort. However, at the end of the day, it must be a system for Ukraine, developed by Ukraine, implemented and utilized by Ukraine, both the central government, the Verkhovna Rada, and local government and citizens. Today, you will hear more about performance management from Ukraine and from other countries. This is not new, but if you do it correctly, based on the Ukrainian context, it can be the latest and most modern local government system in the world. I hope you enjoy the roundtable and you learn more about this exciting local governance concept. So please enjoy yourself. Please be safe. And I look forward to seeing your continued progress in decentralization and local self-government. Thank you very much.
Дякую.
Thank you. And I would like to pass the floor to Vyacheslav Andronovich. Barry mentioned some general reasons why we would need to implement these measurement systems. And now I invite you to share your opinion and your vision of what needs to be measured at the level of local governance and how the ministry and central authorities can use this data. Good afternoon to you all. First of all, let me express gratitude for this event that we organize, for this roundtable, and I welcome Mr. Barry Reid. I don't know if he hears us or not, but maybe he will listen to this later. And we are grateful to DOBRE program for their initiative to implement this aspect, which matters a lot, I believe. It is very important to support the decentralization effort And in the context of the post-decentralization period, it's going to be long until the new decentralization era. So those who have stepped into this process, you know, it's like repair work at home. If you start repair, it lasts forever. Same thing here. But it is important that we have set the principles, the values, and we understand that now the aspect of decentralization is actually about development of life and development of communities, improving quality of services, and one of the tools or mechanisms to develop the democratic state. As mentioned, in the process, initially at the first steps, where the basis of decentralization was establishing the communities that would have adequate capacity, there we tried to look for at least the most straightforward indicators that would make it possible for us to say that this or that community is potentially capable. I wouldn't say that definitely those indicators like the number of children, so I refer to that as demographic indicators or criteria. For example, that is the number of preschool age children or school age children. This is something that gave us certain perspective, and we could see the trend or forecast the trend for demographic development of certain communities. And within the educational activities, it would be also possible to set the district school there set up. Or we could see be guided by the index of taxation capacity. This is to see the economic situation of the communities, and based on that we could use other indicators like the share of local budgets and the total financial indicators. This is rather about land taxes, etc. So that was where we based on the territory of the community. So what I mean is that actually the aspect of capacity of communities is one of key aspects, because the reform, the territorial reform, the decentralization based on delegation of powers to those potentially high capacity communities, all of that is aimed or intended to create development opportunities. While other indicators, potential development indicators, apart from those foundational indicators like the number of people in the community, the population, well, it may change, but more or less it is something that you can rely on, or the territory, maybe some other indicators like some natural or landscape aspects or historical sites. So these are stable, and there are dynamic indicators. It is the economic indicators, doing business and attractiveness of certain territories. I mean, based on that, we then receive some results. So having set up in different ways 1,400 communities, we can say now that not all of them are potentially have the capacity, because the aspect of capacity, it is a concept open to discussion. But I believe that there are no perfect solutions. And when we had the discussion on what the communities should be like, well, you know, it's like in sports. There are always leaders in the rating, and there are always outsiders. There is no country where everybody or every team is a leader. So here we also expect to have leading communities based on a variety of indicators, and some communities that will be outsiders and that will require support from the state. And here it is very important that we set up certain conditions for some unbiased or objective assessment, evaluation, or diagnosis, as it is a trendy word now in the context of the other crisis, the coronavirus crisis. So we need to diagnose their status, and there we are supposed to implement certain activities. So as stipulated in the draft law on local governance, there are several articles in the draft covering the need to hold evaluation assessing capacity of territorial communities in order to understand what is happening where and what kind of projects we need to develop. So communities need to have certain awareness of that, and executive authorities also need to have that knowledge. So what we need to do there, it would be good if this system were launched next year. But to do that, we first of all need to decide on the tools that we're going to use in order to define the capacity to assess the performance. It is a monitoring system, some municipal statistics, which are rather subjective so far. So we need to develop a system to monitor those indices or indicators that we believe would be important to measure the temperature or the capacity of certain communities. The second part of that, based on that information, we need to do the assessment of the performance, and there again we need a system, estimation system, that would make it possible for us to arrive at certain conclusions, to draw some findings. And all of that is required so that we could conduct the analysis for every community, so that communities could see the situation in other communities, and the associations and local authorities also need that information. It's good that we have their representatives today, because it's going to be one of the services that is supposed to be provided by the associations to their members. So based on that estimation, assessment, it's necessary to plan the next steps for the communities that may be kind of problematic communities, what needs to be done to help them look for internal reserves and resources, and maybe it will be necessary to provide them with support from the national funds, or other organizational activities may be needed. And eventually, even the decisions may be made, as mentioned by Barry, when analyzing a certain period and where we see that a certain community proves that it is not able to perform the functions delegated by law, there we would need to look for some ways to help it overcome this problem. And this may result in the so-called municipal consolidation. And again, I welcome this idea that DOBRE program will actively undertake implementation of this work, and us, the ministry, we would like to be actively engaged in that, because we speak about the title of the ministry is Ministry for Development of Communities and Territories. So development is one of priority tasks, even though I would like to emphasize, for us to avoid euphoria, when we say that we are completing the decentralization process, the other way around, we have created the territorial basis for that, and now we proceed with the key kind of fight for decentralization. This is delegating the authorities, but in delegating the powers. So far, we have established the communities that now need to receive the adequate powers and resources, and after that it will be possible to assess their performance. So it is still a huge amount of work in store for us, but we could start. We've tried doing something. We conducted monitoring for financial assessment of territorial communities. We tried to rate them based on other indicators. It works fine, even if we speak about competition, you know, like in sports, where everybody tries to see where they are against their competitors, and that's good because it stimulates ambitions of the communities to look for unused reserves. So I very much welcome that, and we are always with you there. Thank you. So today we have heard about those systems, and you mentioned competitiveness of communities. That is really something that contributes to development in the context that we're going to discuss. Now I pass the floor to Vitaliy. Vitaliy, we have discussed this topic with you already. Those were expert discussions. So what's your vision? What do you think needs to be measured, and what decisions could be made based on those measurements? No microphone. No microphone. No sound. No sound. No microphone. No microphone from Vitaliy. No microphone. No sound, sorry. Now it's better. I thought that it was loud enough, but okay. So we could see a number of successful cases and the experience of France, Sweden, Poland, different countries with different approaches. So if we speak about the next steps, about implementing the performance monitoring tools, well, actually, the way how we discussed that with the ministry, with the expert community, well, maybe in implementing that systemic approach, we would need to be pioneers. And maybe Ukraine doesn't have that social and economic situation, and we have a number of problems, so we can hardly afford 20 years of research, as it was done by Sweden, to revise the structure of communities. So we need to rely on something. And let me mention just some of these things. First, sure, monitoring of performance needs to have legislative framework. And the question is whether it's going to be in the law on the territorial structures or on the territorial policy. Well, that's an open question. That needs to be a tool that would be used by the government. But the key actor here needs to be the Ministry for Development of Communities and Territories. That's obvious. That's one of key ministries. While here, if we speak about healthcare or education, then we need to analyze it further. And of course, it needs to be digitalized. Vyacheslav is absolutely right that without relevant and municipal statistics, it wouldn't be possible to monitor anything. And we know that based on statistics, well, we know that for statistics we have issues in the country, so maybe we will need to engage Western partners, NGOs, and consolidate efforts of different branches of power there. So now what do we need to measure? On the one hand, we have very logical criteria used in the methodology of the Ministry for Regional Development. That's about the territory, about the number of children, and of course we see the reducing number of children, but this is about perspectives of the community. But if we speak about territories, that is a rather static indicator, and I mentioned it to Yuri Hanushuk in the previous discussion. I mentioned that the territory, that's the resource, that's land. However, we also need to see how the community uses that resource, whether they develop businesses, whether they work efficiently in the aspect of land tax or real estate tax and other local taxes. So in other aspects, you need to strike a balance. First, that's about governance aspects. This is where the state analyzes its own policies, and human-centric approach, how efficiently they use certain instruments and how efficient the authorities are. Even though it's obvious that for local authorities, actually the main assessment is done in the voting process, if we speak about democracies. And during elections. Then some quantitative indicators that we can measure. We can measure, for example, centers for administrative services, ambulatories, outpatient clinics, etc. However, so far we are not yet ready to assess quality indicators. Well, for education, that could be results of the official exams, but maybe it is not always objective and impartial, and we cannot really go very deep there so far. And finally, collecting the data, analyzing the data, seeing the dynamics, that's important. But why do we do that? That's the key question. Sure, if we see systemic problems, issues in the communities that do not have the capacity to provide basic services to citizens, that regress from the point of view of basic indicators, there in the legislation we need to have a tool that would make it possible to revise, to change the configuration, the administrative structure and territorial structure. We need to have that tool at the national level, and I realize that we have communities that are located in suburban areas of large cities. Many of them are artificial, but they're still there. So obviously, after a while, they will merge with those larger communities. However, obviously, there will be territories where that will be too large to ensure access to services, and then if local communities do not manage this infrastructure within, maybe there we will need to think about a different vector of development. And of course, a significant part of further developments and depend on those people who will be elected on the 25th of October. They will have much more resources and wider toolkits than their predecessors. So here the state needs to monitor, to provide the toolkits, while these tools will be used at the local level by the communities. So this is it so far, and there maybe we will have a Q&A session to discuss that. Now, Valentina, Vyacheslav has already mentioned the role of the association, so now let's hear from you and from Igor. What do you think about the measurement approaches? Good afternoon. Well, I've been listening to this, and I do believe that this is a very important and interesting topic for me, for local governance. Why for me? Because for almost 20 years I did work at the level of local governance, and the aspect of efficiency, well, it has always been very high on the agenda of local governance, because these are the people who are, this is the level of governance that is closest to people, closest to citizens. And local authorities, local governments, they are accountable for improvement of the services for residents of their communities. So today we need to speak about the experience that we have in Ukraine now, not only in the countries that are our neighbors and partners. So in Ukraine, in 2003, we had the first city, the city of Berdyansk, that developed a system to manage the quality of services at the municipal level. That was back then when quality of services, that was a topic that was very kind of awkward. Because even officials, they were thinking about that they implement the authorities, but they do not provide services. But now we've made a long way, and now we see it as an important progress, and now we see that really it is about the nature of power where you provide services. So if we ask the question today, what are we going to measure? Well, of course, we need to measure the result. We need to measure the quality of services and performance efficiency of those services that are provided by public authorities at the national or local governance level. And what was mentioned by Vyacheslav and Vitaliy, well, we won't be able to do without statistics. And for many years, we've been discussing that why nobody is comes up with the idea of implementing a profound reform of statistics. Without that, all of our assessments will cause doubts, unless that's an independent national level institution that collects all the data, pulls the data from those units that are supposed to provide those data. So all the indicators that were used for amalgamation were statistical, based on statistical data. So for the next 5 years, we would like us to focus on these parameters for every community. If we speak about performance, we need to think about measuring it further. I mean, whether the communities manage provision of the respective services. So we do need to develop indicators for services and for results. And the methods used by DOBRE program, well, there we could use some other approaches. There were models to manage performance in Norway, in Netherlands. We cooperate with those associations, so they have tools available. While the Ministry for Development of Communities and Territories, they are definitely the most important priority partner for local governments, for the associations, so that to make those instruments and tools convenient and friendly for local governments. So we look forward to partnership with all the ministries. It's not just that we have developed a law for you and you implement it and then we measure. No, we need partnership. We need to develop those standards and indicators, and all local governments will be ready to implement these models and tools. We are ready to make it so that every community, we are ready to provide expert support for the communities. We can organize some trainings, and together with the ministry, we need to create incentives for all of that to happen. Because only in those, in that frame of trust and partnership, only in this way it is possible to develop efficient local governance. Not by pressure or threats or intimidation, as we sometimes hear, that again we are going to liquidate some, or we are going to revise the parameters. Well, maybe the communities will arrive at such an independent decision after 2 or 3 years if they do encounter some problems, because local governance, they are always flexible. They are ready to provide the best conditions for their citizens. So we are ready to not only present some decisions, but to support the communities in learning, raising their awareness on how to use those instruments. Thank you for this invitation. And really, that's not just an important topic. I believe that it is critically important, because I agree with Vyacheslav and Vitaliy that we are standing at the very beginning, start of a true reform. We only start living in a country of communities, and the objective of the reform was setting up communities that would have adequate capacity. And now we need to understand how we follow, whether we adequately have implemented the reform, whether we have achieved the objective of the reform, if the communities have the capacity. So the monitoring to measure performance and capacity of communities, that's a key task now for us to continue the reform and to enhance results of the reform, maybe to learn some lessons and correct some mistakes that definitely have happened in the process on the path of implementing such a sophisticated and complex reform. And this is an address from the 21st of May 2020. This is an address of the association based on results of the administrative and territorial reform. And here we highlight that the resulting structure does include some errors and mistakes. So back then in May, we insisted on that in the law, we stipulate objective criteria to assess performance and capacity of communities, where there would be clear basis and a clear procedure to revise the format of those communities that over a certain period of time won't be able to ensure adequate capacity. So us as the association, and let me remind you that our association is an association of village and settlement rural communities. So in the process of the administrative and territorial reform, we focused on what we referred to as the objective format for every village, settlement, and town. So we will continue focusing on that. The administrative and territorial structure of the state was such that every settlement had the best format, and thus the monitoring system is supposed to provide the grounds and the procedure to optimize the format where it turns out not optimal. And the grounds that the system needs to rely on are the following. The system needs to be used to assess objective capacity of the communities in the context of its format and the financial managerial capacity. This is not about assessing efficient, effective governance. Effective governance, that's important, and we do need to assess that. But effective governance, it can be corrected as a result of elections, but that's not about revising the format of the community. We need to speak about the objective capacity of the community in this format, where the format changes and the capacity grows up, while the efficiency and effectiveness of governance needs to be assessed separately. It is important to delineate those things, and because these are two mutually linked aspects, but this is about two different things. Then this system needs to be stipulated in the law, and maybe we need to develop some procedures in governmental acts, but we need the communities to have clear understanding what they should rely on. This system needs to be based on objective data, statistical data, as mentioned by the colleagues. And there we have huge amount of work to do, because the municipal statistics, as mentioned, we don't yet have that at all. And third thing is that this system needs to be focused on providing due quality of life and access to services. This was the emphasis of the reform: access to services and comfortable living in every community. On the part of the Ukrainian Association of Communities, in view of our history, we are going to focus above all, on capacity of two large communities, which could be divided in the process of the reform, because there could be challenges to the managerial capacity, and also disproportional communities. Usually these are communities where the center is in the rayon center and the peripheral communities. And also the communities around large cities like Ivano-Frankivsk and Poltava, the cities that have merged with two large territories. We will see whether those rural communities will feel comfortable in that huge municipal community. We are grateful to Vitaliy for this initiative to launch this process. We have already had a very constructive discussion session to launch development of this system, and the association, we will definitely be very active. We will actively participate in that process to develop the system. And in further, we are definitely ready to cooperate with the ministry to implement the monitoring as mentioned by Vyacheslav. Igor, I have a clarification question here. You mentioned objective criteria and you separate them from efficiency of governance. But isn't the quality of services in the community the result of governance? Well, I mentioned that they are linked. However, there are two consequences for the communities. If the head leader of the community and local council are ineffective, then it can be resolved by elections. So it doesn't mean that this capacity is objectively lacking capacity, financial capacity or managerial capacity to provide due services to people. If the current city council or local council doesn't ensure a provision of adequate services, it doesn't yet mean objective lack of capacity. Objective lack of capacity, we believe, is based on those objective indicators that need to be determined, defined, that you need to know, and that you probably need to be able to collect, because we don't yet have that data. So we quite agree that it could be about the remoteness, about distance, about the number of children, as mentioned in the methodology, or aspects of the number of resources available to the community, for example, the number of land resources that objectively create the capacity to generate income for the community. So fully delineating managerial and the governance components, well, that's not possible. However, we would like it, and this is what we're going to do. Well, we would like to make it so that this system is not a system to assess only the efficiency and effectiveness of governance, because again, governance effectiveness, this is about the election process, re-electing or electing new people. We have a number of examples where with the new leadership communities start developing in a very different way than before. So we are looking forward to very complicated work and complex work to decide on objective criteria for capacity of communities. I would only like to add that elections is not the only democratic instrument. The decentralization reform has brought the authorities and power closer to people, so there are ways to influence effective governance. It could be about day-to-day engagement to activities of local governance. Yes, local democracy, that matters. Maybe you had some comments there. I saw some reactions. Well, the colleagues have explained how to separate this natural capacity that is more or less stable and the governance capacity. Well, I had this idea that imagine a car, and if you have a driver who is not very skillful, definitely this car will be damaged. Same about the community, but you can replace the driver, that's possible. But what about the car? the capacity of the community, adequate parameters to develop. Well, there, I believe that when we do this monitoring, maybe it could really include these two perspectives. First, the foundation, the basis that the local community is based on, and second aspect that is about efficiency of governance, services that are provided, etc. Because, by the way, you may provide services, but if the quality is low, this is about efficacy and performance of the government. So again, if you have a car where no matter who the driver is, you cannot go faster than 50 kilometers per hour, well, there you cannot do anything about that. You need to replace the engine or what. Well, this is a roundtable, so if I may respond, because that's an interesting idea. Based on that second chapter, where we assess efficiency of governance, it is possible to come up with recommendations for the communities. And so in order to develop your capacity, you need to do this and that because you do it inadequately. While if you see that the governance is okay, we need to switch to the first section. Based on evaluating those objective criteria, we could think about reformatting the community. And that's a very important thing, because it is about the succession or the procedure of using different levers. Okay, if we don't have any further comments, let's switch to the next speakers. We are going to have two speakers now. We invite Valery Tertichka to join the discussion from the academic community. Well, we have this discussion, and maybe it would be reasonable to apply the approaches that some time ago were used for the rating of analytical centers. So we tried to do that. We contacted analytical centers, and initially it was a negative perception, like who you are, etc. We tried to explain. We want to help you. We want to make you more successful. So there we used the approach of the indicators, where we said, well, you are the best in this area, but we could suggest some other areas where you could also do better. And that was the approach that kind of paid back, and it was eventually the perception was very positive, like leave your methodology with us, we will go back to it later. So there were quite a lot of positive outcomes then. Then leadership, that's a very interesting concept, community level leadership, where you said that you can replace the driver. Well, capacity, that is quite a complex indicator, and based on that, well, we can decide whether they have the capacity or not. That's to a great extent about competitiveness of communities, and that is linked to strategic planning or strategic management. Unfortunately, now we don't have legislative tools for that. I mean, the law that was discussed in 2011, then it was updated. So monitoring and evaluation in this aspect, strategic planning, that is rather important, because currently, unfortunately, the situation is such that this process is implemented within USAID or UNDP projects only. And I believe that it would be important to do that, and the monitoring system is included, built into strategic planning. That is a mandatory component. Whether we want that or not, we are supposed to do this evaluation. Now, if we speak about the evaluation and assessment within certain projects or programs, well, there it is even more difficult, because we understand that the national programs, they are not always mutually coordinated, while the budget programs, they have a better system of monitoring. In other programs, some objectives, the focus is on objectives, but we need to coordinate the two. Then what's important is the outputs, outcomes, and the impacts. Any policy at the local or national level, we understand that it requires certain investments, and you expect a specific result, as mentioned by Valentina. We need to measure that result. We need to measure the consequences, what we obtain for the next elections, and the impacts. This is our impression after we visit a certain community. So we can speak about direct and indirect quality, low quality, or quality or quantitative sectoral indicators. So we need to decide on the set of indicators that would be the best. It may be individual for every community. It would make it possible for the communities to show their strengths and advantages. We can speak about results in the economic sense, and this is what the roundtable is about. I mean, efficiency as the cost of the process, whether economically that could be done cheaper. So this is actually based on my experience of training the managers. I've been working in the Ukrainian governance school. We set it up. We had the opportunity and we jumped on that. So we try to train the managers who have strategic thinking, who can do engage in policy making. And thus now quite a lot of our students, and they participate in the competitions for civil servants positions, and many of them win. So how to measure that? First, I believe that we need to have certain time lag, because it is not necessary that you see the results immediately overnight. If a community is focused on, for example, establishing a vocational school or something, that's a long process. But if we take the indicator of the number of children, then it could be seen as a positive idea. But if we are guided by some other indicators, that could be quite a challenge to set that up. And the second component is about external and internal assessment, because we are always mostly guided by internal evaluation. This is what we can measure with statistical data, etc. And it is always considered that external evaluation is more unbiased, and this causes certain rejection, though, or resistance. And our experience of working within the projects when we develop monitoring systems for some communities, mostly it is about statistical data, while this external evaluation, it was not perceived positively. But without that, we will not be able to progress. So the answer to the question how to measure what, there it's necessary to analyze the set of criteria, because it tells us what we try to measure. We analyze this methodology that will be developed by the ministry based on the experience in other areas. So I believe this is how we will proceed. We could speak about performance measuring, performance auditing, as mentioned by in the introductory address. But now this executive audit and executive staff, it's rather difficult to measure. And in the legislative framework, we often refer to financial audit. So usually, often it is focused on financial indicators only. While speaking about the assessment, we are still governed by the order of the Ministry of Economic Development, where there are some contradictions stipulating that this monitoring, performance monitoring, is mandatory or not. So if we implement mandatory monitoring, then we can expect some outcomes, some impacts, and the results of that. So far, I believe that the control system that is often used instead of monitoring and evaluation, well, it doesn't work, because you can implement control. However, you need to have certain impetus there, or we need to have legislative framework and the adequate methodology. Thank you. Well, for us not to have illusions about that, I mentioned the figure that we have 1,469 territorial communities plus the city of Kiev and Sevastopol. So, but I mean something else. We need to have the same approach to our vision of the performance or capacity that we try to measure. When we try to measure financial capacity, for example, we divide the territorial communities into categories. You cannot compare, for example, a rural territorial community, and has a very different infrastructure than an oblast, significant city or oblast center. These are very different worlds. And recently here we presented assessment of oblast centers. It was supported by USAID. So they focused on oblast centers and they used certain parameters to rate them. So I mean that when we develop terms of reference for the capacity measuring, there we will need to see how to categorize those communities based on certain parameters. I would refer to that with the sports term like weight categories, because sometimes those lightweighters can hardly compete with heavyweighters. So we will need to take that into account, and probably there will be different indicators and different capacity indicators. And because one thing is that you can do something, that is one aspect of the capacity. Another aspect is where you don't use what is available. Also, there is the methodology to decide, to define depressed or territories. Based on some indicators, Tokmak city, some other cities, they were included into that category of the depressed territories. Because formally, when you look at those indicators, well, they had sufficient number of residents, etc. However, it didn't function well. And that's also about capacity. I mean, it is a large city, but this large elephant cannot walk, cannot do anything. But again, that's when we continue with working group sessions and discussions, we will need to take that into account. I mean, where you compare those that are comparable. Thank you. There is a comment from our audience, online audience, from Oleg Konotoptsev. He says that services, it is about, they are obsolete, because now advanced countries engage citizens in managerial decision making. Is anybody planning to assess not only performance but also participative democracy? I believe that this is rather a question sponsored by Maxim Letsiba, but let's be frank. Whether the capacity, the communities provide services and at which level that impacts human lives. While engaging citizens into decision making, that's just a tool that is intended to improve the quality of services and to improve management and bottom-up interaction. So I believe that this is the instrument where we need to pay more attention to, but this is not a measurement instrument. I don't want to mention the ratings for the cities, but there is a rating that says that this city uses the coolest state-of-the-art instruments, and that's okay, but in the central street in that city, they have just garbage and they do not manage their waste. So I believe it sounds good, but the community doesn't see that as a success story. So you need to measure and balance. Participative democracy or local democracy, this could be an element for the second part, where the government needs to know how to do that, and assessing that aspect may be needed. In the section where we manage where we assess managerial efficiency and performance. In addition to what Vitaliy mentioned, I would like to add one thing, and I'm sure of that because I've been actively working with aspects of participative democracy and local democracy. So an important result of effective participation and engagement is increasing the mobilization of internal resources of the community. Because when people engage, there you add the resource that cannot be engaged in any other way, only by engaging people. And that's also about even out-of-pocket financial resources of those people who engage in local issues. So adequate local democracy is supposed to expand internal resources of the community, and that matters. But definitely that's not an objective criterion for reformatting communities and for transformation of the communities as mentioned in the context of the administrative and territorial structure. I would like to go back to the analogy mentioned by Vyacheslav, the car analogy, and participative mechanisms. These are the engines and the wheels that may improve the car's performance, and it may be done no matter who the driver is. Well, you see, if we introduce this indicator, this is for the sponsors of the question, as you mentioned. Well, that would be imitation of, public hearings. You know how often it happens when we speak about urban development, where they just bring some hired people to imitate public hearings. That's an instrument. This is where local authorities want to check if they're making adequate decisions, but that shouldn't be done just formally, just to tick the box and to have a higher rating, like we had this number of hearings. But some 10 years ago, there was an order from the top level that we need to assess performance of heads of oblast administrations based on the number of orders or decisions that they pass, But that's inadequate, because then the official would just focus on the number of events, not on performance or efficiency. If we have some economic performance indicators, quality of services, their local authorities will need to decide on how to do that, using these tools or other tools, or if otherwise they could hire third-party experts to help them do that. But anyway, they should reach that objective. But if we use these methods, like the number of public hearings, then it would be like in that poem about kind of let people decide. Well, people have voted for you to decide, and if you have no capacity, you should leave. This process, as discussed, answering the question, well, that's always a two-component aspect. Well, this is a process that always consists of two components, and the question is about capacity of the government and capacity of civil society, because there is only the option of co-decision making. Now we are trying to engage the citizens into policy making, and that is always two-part process. And so it is not about that only the civil society can develop adequate policies and force them on the government. No, it should be about the mutual process. The government and the civil society develop adequate solutions, and then it is about mutual accountability for that. That's also key. Mutual accountability for the decisions that you have made. That's important. So this is not about that only one of the parties wins. they are mutual connected and they are both accountable there. Let me just add that here we are speaking about development of the managerial culture at the level of local governance, enrichment with a variety of tools that have been developed in other countries, in our local governments. But since today we speak in allegories after Vyacheslav proposed that, well, look, local governance, it is not just a uniform phenomenon. And now in the territory of smaller towns and villages, they have just started developing adequate local governments, because larger cities, they have like 15 or 20 years of developing this managerial culture for their local governance. But smaller communities, they need assistance, and these instruments will be of use for them: engagement, efficiency of services, and all the rest. However, maybe for them, as mentioned by Vyacheslav Andronovich, for them we need to develop different parameters and indicators, and maybe we shouldn't start measuring immediately, because at school they start giving you marks only when you reach the second year, because first you need to have a better understanding of the parameters that you aspire to, and only after that you do the rating exercise, etc. And maybe there should be different categories and different ratings. So your last comment, and then we go on. Yes, I would like to comment on that, because we forget that we are, all of us are not quite ready for using those tools, because I do field work, so to say, regarding local democracy, and I see that people are not always ready to adequately engage in local decision making. So speaking about criteria, definitely that's not about the number of public hearing or meetings, public meetings, but that's about the number of efforts and maybe investments into this common interest things. And this is what makes it different from the formalized or formal approach, because when I was ahead of the local administration office, I remember that back then they used public participation, public engagement as just a formal tool to legitimize a certain decision. So we have quite a lot of so-called formal or hired aspects to that public participation. So we need to do a lot of work to arrive at understanding of true public engagement, joint efforts, joint responsibility and accountability, etc. Well, that's an interesting discussion. However, we need to go on. We need to hear all of our speakers today. And I would like to now launch another video from the USA, from the expert for democracy and governance, Ilire. She has experience of research of local governance indicators, and she also has the experience of implementing that system in Kosovo, but she's going to speak about the general principles.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Julia, for inviting me to contribute to this discussion. My name is Ilira Gimi. I'm calling from Washington, D.C. I was asked to speak a few minutes on kind of the foundational questions on performance management, including the why we're approaching it at all, and then how to make it work. Starting with the first one, it's important to consider the kind of two pillars and two relationships of local government units. One, performance management itself helps us understand how the government is serving and how it's implementing its functions. But also it helps us understand what impact are those functions having on the way we interact and serve citizens and communities and the beneficiaries of policies and programs. And then lastly, it's important to note that performance management helps us assure that policies, strategies, and services are in alignment. So it's also an important aspect to consider that the information that we gather through a variety of performance measurement tools helps us put all of, so to say, the pieces of the puzzle together and how we're implementing the functions and what kind of impact they're having. Starting off from this standpoint, local governments serve their citizens and communities, but also, of course, inevitably, they have a relationship and accountability channels with the central government. And here, it's important to note and recognize, of course, the relying on central government for funding and resources, but also that relationship, again, as I said, on accountability and sort of justifying or proving that the local government institutions can, in fact, self-govern and operate and serve citizens and perform the functions that they're legally mandated to do. What's kind of as a next point to share is that over the last few decades, we've seen an increase of attention on data and what the importance of data in decision making, and that's very good and very positive as a development in the work of local governance broadly. So there's this promise of big data, and that it inevitably improves decision making. There's a lot of attention, as I said, on collecting data, but what's even more important is unpacking what does that data serve and what does it help us do. So here it's very important to state that we need to focus on outcome data, which helps us connect the mere aspect of reporting on a function or the delivery of the service with strategic planning and that vision of the impact that we want to see on beneficiaries, on citizens, and so forth. Measurements themselves, the measuring tools, performance measuring tools, are employed in a variety of sectors and policy areas, from provision of services in health and education to public safety, road and transportation, the work of police forces and staffing of fire stations and safety in public parks and environmental protection, opportunities for citizens, communities, access of persons with disabilities and various groups to the services that they need to have. So, in addition to this, there's also, of course, performance measurement tools on the capacity, the ability to collect revenue and to collect taxes and to have efficient and effective public procurement and so forth. So really the scope is as broad and as wide as we want to see it. We're talking about an endless set of possibilities of what we can look at, what we can measure. In some counties in the United States, a very common example you can see is the response time. So providing a service, efficiency is given a lot of attention. How long does it take for an emergency care unit to respond to a citizen request? How long does it, what's the time that it takes for public road management to fix a pothole that's been reported? Or the time it takes for a local government council to share the information on its decisions and the audience that it reaches. So again, we're seeing a lot of examples of, again, just that data collection and focusing on efficiency in some of these examples. Some local government units or central government may focus on citizen satisfaction as another data entry point. What are citizens thinking about a certain policy or program that's been implemented? In another aspect or example, for smaller local government units, for example, we're looking to, let's say, communities with less than 50,000 residents, where this broad selection of areas on which to look at might be somewhat restricted. It's understandable to then set of benchmarks and priority areas on which to focus on if there are no resources to delve into every possible policy area or every possible public service that needs to be provided. So that's, again, it's about prioritizing, but also an important aspect of this is involving and being inclusive to groups, citizens, other colleagues, departments, and other units in making the decision of what benchmarks need to be focused on, how to design those standards, and so forth, in order to make that performance measurement that's decided upon as effective as possible and to have the impact that it needs to have. On the other side of the spectrum is some examples of measurement points which exist but might not really go a long way, including the number of council meetings that take place or the number of reports that are produced, percentage of crimes investigated, and so forth. These may describe the tremendous amount of work that goes into actually doing this work. However, they might not show the results that are achieved, and they might not necessarily get us to the information of what is actionable after this data has been collected, what's kind of the next stage to that. A question that I was asked to consider was what are the benefits of performance measurement on the central level? And here I would point to sort of three key pillars. The central government can help outline a vision of how performance data can be used in decision making. It can help communicate that vision to government structures, citizens, elected officials in a variety of ways. But it can also help reinforce the commitment to a culture of performance management that supports education and training of staff and is transparent about what the process entails. Internally, everyone needs to understand and kind of commit and have that clear commitment to this vision, but also externally, citizens need to be able to, again, understand what is taking place, what is being measured, how the government is approaching this, and how can they track it, but also how can they engage? What are their opportunities for engagement? Having these pillars institutionalized at the central level is very important and can be very effective, but is in no way exclusive to the integral role of performance managers and these systems also being functional at the local government. In this case, we can look at it as a sort of a web system, a variety of layers of where data is collected and how it's analyzed, but also that this web system communicates with all the different unit points. So that's almost the most effective way to make it work, where information is shared, the different parts of the pillars across departments horizontally, but also with the national government are accountable and transparent with one another, in this case helping to put together meaningful analysis about what that data is telling us and what can we do as an action, if anything, programs, policies need adjusting, improving, canceling, expanding, scaling up, and so forth. It's always very common to leave challenges for the end, and I'm fitting that model.
Наразі завершимо цей запис, тому що він дуже длінний.
So we are going to stop here, but two aspects that Ilya has emphasized, and we mentioned that already, this is different approach to communities of different sizes. As Vyacheslav Andronovich mentioned, that smaller communities, if they have lack of resources, they may focus more on some priorities to be measured. And she also emphasizes one of important criteria. It's not only the quality, but also speed of provision of services and how it is measured in the US in the context of different services and based on different criteria. So now I would like us to switch from international experience to Ukrainian experience. I invite Ukrainian representatives of local governance. We have two representatives of the communities that we work with, and the first one is Lyudmila Bilakis, Deputy Head of Novoukrainska Consolidated Amalgamated Community. Good afternoon. So I represent Novoukrainska Consolidated Community, and the index for performance of local governance, we do use it in our community as an instrument to assess and monitor our activities. In our community, we refer to it as PMCI. And now, at the session of the local council, we presented results of PMCI findings for 2020, and the session approved the roadmap that we are going to follow during the Q4 this year and first 3 quarters next year. This instrument was introduced to us by DOBRE program because our team work with the program. In 2020, we held PMCI, the fourth PMCI exercise in our community. In 2017 and 18, we engaged DOBRE experts, but for 2 years now we've been working independently with this tool, and we do have the experience, practical experience there. And I would like to tell you that PMCI for our community, it is a practical and strategic instrument to achieve the goals for development of our community, implementing its vision and goals. We have the development strategy for the period till 2027. We developed it jointly within DOBRE program. We developed it together with our community, with our citizens. So in that strategy, we have collegial objectives and goals, what our citizens would like to see in their community, their level of services, what kind of services they need, no matter where they live. And the PMCI concept and the mechanism of it, that's a step-by-step instrument, a practical instrument to achieve the goals of our strategy. If we take 3 directions, 3 areas for the strategy, and this is, for example, creating the active and proactive community with a high quality of life. And there is a goal too. This is about environment, improving the environmental status. So here, when we apply PMCI instrument and when we develop the roadmap, there we indicate the steps that we need to undertake to ensure improvement of the environmental situation. The plans, decisions to be made, some activities to implement, financial resources that need to be allocated within our budget, or where we need to analyze and engage other budgets or programs. So the competency criteria and the indicators, they cover all areas of life of our community and the strategic document of the community. I don't know how many people worked on developing PMCI, but I believe that they managed to develop a concept that is applicable for the experience of communities. We are very different. And here we discussed it that there should be a tool that could be implemented in larger and smaller communities like rural communities. Definitely we are very different, but if we speak about the indicator of developing the plans, here it is stipulated that plans need to be developed, but there is no set level I mean the level where smaller communities would be able to reach. I mean, every community needs to have and develop their own understanding of improved services and their vision of how they're going to achieve that. They need to develop an adequate algorithm to implement this plan to improve these services, and this is what PMCI covers. Another strength of PMCI is that it covers all the target audiences, and the criteria and indicators take into account the decisions and activities that can be implemented at the local level. Every competency and sub-competencies are accompanied by individual indicators based on participative approach, as well as they include monitoring and communication for all the areas. The matrix, it is kind of an analytical document for us. After the first year of this evaluation, based on the discussions and questionnaire surveys, we determined our baseline level. On the year-to-year basis, we now work on this criteria, and we see the processes that happen annually. We can see the dynamics, positive or negative. We do SWOT analysis, and we see strengths and weaknesses of the communities, and then we decide on further priorities. Decision making, making amendments and changes in strategic work of the communities. When we work with the matrix, we see resources of the community within just one document and whether we use them or not and what needs to be engaged. So when we conduct surveys, we can see the living standards in the community, level of satisfaction or dissatisfaction among the citizens separately for every service, whether the services are accessible or not, the priorities that are relevant for our residents. We also do analysis of our decisions made by the authorities, and especially the impact of these decisions on the community, on our residents, and all of that makes it possible for us to conduct the evaluation and to decide on the level that we are going to be governed by next year when we implement the respective activities. In the roadmap, as I mentioned, we approve it at the council sessions. There we set the goals and objectives that we would like to reach in a year. We plan the activities, how we are going to reach that. For example, while for the competency of service provision, we have 3 points, but we want to have 4 points in a year. We need to complete implementation of the plans to improve the services that we developed for indicators 1 and 2. That also includes the mechanism to measure the quality, expanding the services and the performance. A lot of criteria actually that we need to meet in order to have 4 points there. According to the plans, we need to provide for objective improvements, and we need to develop the adequate clear mechanism to measure the quality of services. We need to analyze all the data. We need to analyze the level of covering the annual indicators. We also have long-term plans that include a lot of activities that we develop on our own. I mean, there is no standard requirement. Every community comes up with independent developments, and they decide on their priorities, what they would like to implement in their communities. So we revise these plans on the annual basis. So these are living instruments. In our roadmap, we also indicate the decisions that need to be made, the resources that we need, the finances, the deadlines, responsible persons, and we do that for every competency and for every criterion. And thus, we then have the general document that covers all the units of the executive committee, the municipal authorities, the utilities. And we plan interim monitoring that makes it possible for us, for our large team, to be on the same page, and that ensures efficiency of processes in general. Here you can see results for some of the indicators, and this was research done by an international research company, external company, because we need to conduct both internal and external assessments. So here for services, awareness of the public, efficiency of work, the budgetary process, you can see data as of late 2019, because in 2020 we have not yet conducted this PMCI exercise. Lyudmila, if I may ask a question to you. I understand and I know this instrument, so based on your presentation, this is an instrument that helps to contribute to improved efficiency of local governance. And we had this discussion here, speaking about that elections, this is something that may influence efficiency of local governance. I mean, if the local governance is inefficient after elections, that may change. So are you going to revise your approach after elections? And is this instrument going to be useful after elections too? Well, elections are not going to change our approach because, you know, no matter what the team is after elections, but our residents, they are used to that, they engaged in decision making. A lot of steps have been made in that direction. So engaging in any field of activity in the local community. So I'm sure that in our community we will continue using PMCI, because, as I mentioned, that's very efficient for teamwork. And we mentioned the new communities that are going to be set up. Well, if I compared a new community that has no experience, well, I would recommend PMCI instrument to them as a reference book. There, they would see what they need to do in order to do it right. Thank you. And now let's hear another participant from communities, from Bashtanska community. Thank you, Lyudmila. Natalia Shafarost, she's going to speak about other tools that they use in their community. And after that, we connect Mr. Lozynskyi, as he has joined us. Good afternoon, and I welcome you all. It's so nice to see you all. And today I would like to present to you the hands-on example how we use PMCI in our work, I decided to focus on strategic planning, how we measure achievement of objectives of the strategy and the level of satisfaction with the services, and why PMCI helps us there. So speaking about achievement of the strategy's goals, when we amalgamated, it was the second wave in 2016. So the strategy was developed then in a way where we tried to include everything because we had a lot of dreams. We wanted to include everything possible there. However, now we can see that we need to revise that. According to the strategic plan, it is stipulated that the monitoring for strategic plan is done twice a year. And this is what we do for all the objectives and the programs as determined in the local development strategy. And there are certain indicators based on which we analyze this strategic plan. This is an extensive table. It is filled in by all structural units. For their areas, this is about financing, initial indicators, dynamics. So that's quite a significant table. We also include the reports on using the funds. And that makes it possible for us to prepare reports to analyze annual budgets of the community. So as a result, we have a document that makes it possible to analyze the status for implementation of the strategic plan. We see some directions where we may lack something, some weaknesses. So I tried to focus on one strategic objective and one operational objective, and to see to show you year by year its implementation. If you look at the percentage, you can see that for the plan this year, the execution is lagging behind. So there, the matrix helps us a lot because there we can very clearly see these links. Financing, citizen engagement, as my colleague mentioned, all of that impacts execution of the strategic plan. And again, it is quite extensive. So today we already have our reports for 3 years, and we can speak about specific weaknesses. We see that we need to improve the monitoring system. We need to improve the monitoring system because the indicators developed, they don't make it possible for us to adequately see the effect of implementing certain activities. So we need to have clearer indicators, we need to have more of them. And the distribution by quality and quantity indicators, that needs to be more clear. We also now need to be guided by the national and regional strategy. That is about using smaller specialization in the strategy. We need to make our strategy compliant with those strategies. And what's most important, we need to make sure that it is more economically grounded, because most strategies in Ukraine now, they are social, while we need to think about the economy in our community. Only then we can cover social goals. Another thing, based on PMCI, we see that we need controlled expenditure planning and budgeting, gender balance, gender audits, and targeted programs, budgeted programs, applying gender-based approaches for local governance. All of that has an impact on implementation of the activities. We have 2 gender-sensitive target programs, and for the next year we can see where there are gaps and where it is possible to save funds, where there are cases of inefficient use of funds, etc. Speaking about satisfaction with services, so there is a question from decentralization webpage from Konstantin Stanitsky, if there are quantity indicators like increase in revenues of the community and those indicators that can be used to improve the quality of asset management. In our strategy, we don't have the indicator for growing revenues of the community, but we use it when we assess capacity, when we use PMCI actually. Because this is the link between financing and implementation of the activities. There you can see that clearly. So we do use that in our work. Now, speaking about satisfaction with services, I believe that everybody will agree with me that this is the most complicated indicator for local governance, and that is quite difficult to measure that. It depends on a variety of factors. And PMCI made it possible for us to assess the impact and the links for all the competences for that indicator. In our practice, we use quite a lot of instruments from DOBRE program, from other programs. And here I show results of this research. We participated in this project, and in 2020 in our community we are going to have 4 waves of the survey, public opinion survey. And for us to have the results and consulting, maybe we need some help, some assistance somewhere. So we included the list of services that we would like to analyze in our community. We try to see whether people are satisfied with those services, whether they want to live in this community. So the list of questions was rather large. 2 waves, and now based on this data we can make managerial decisions, we can make corrections in some plans or objectives that we set. Maybe we could pay attention to something that we didn't pay attention to. And also on the permanent basis, we conduct surveys on Facebook, on the official website. We use the tabs that were provided by DOBRE program, which is especially important for rural areas because there are problems with internet connection. So that makes it possible for us to more efficiently collect this data. And we have conducted the surveys for the PLEP projects within the plans to improve services and to ensure local economic development. And for these surveys, they are very focused and they refer to particular services or problems, issues that we want to analyze in more detail. Or if it is about implementation of a project, we monitor the change in opinion of the public at the start of implementation, in the middle of the process, and at the end, and we see whether people change their mind as a result of the project, whether they're satisfied or not. So we try to follow that. Natalia, if we could speed up 1 more minute. And the next slide. So due to PMCI, we find it much easier to do now because all the programs and plans, they are part of PMCI. So it's important to understand that all the products, all the activities that the communities work with, they are mutually linked. And the PMCI is not a separate product offered to the communities, but that is a map, that is an instrument that makes it possible to see where we go and what kind of action plan we need. That it makes it possible to structure, to streamline activities. So here it is about that this instrument makes it possible to have comprehensive approach to organizational management for community governance. And you see that these competences are mutually linked. And when preparing the presentation, I did not even show all the mutual links. So we believe that PMCI is quite a good instrument that can be suggested because we see the clear objectives here. Thank you. Unfortunately, we have little time now. Roman Lozynskyi has joined us now. Can we join him? Roman, can you hear us? Vyacheslav is going to sing a song for you. Can you hear us? Maybe we switch to another speaker. Can we connect Norbert?
Just a second, Norbert. Роман, чи можете говорити зараз?
So, Roman, can you speak now? Can you hear us, Roman, now? Then we go to Mr. Norbert, and after that we make another try. Norbert, you're welcome.
Sorry for this. We were trying to connect with all our speakers. Чи можемо ми підключити Норберта? Так, ми його бачимо, але його потрібно на весь екран і його презентацію.
Чи чути мене? Доброго дня всім.
О, Роман.
Now we hear Roman. Okay, Roman, good afternoon. We understand that you are somewhere on the way. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you. I can see myself in the chat. So good afternoon and welcome from Drushkivka, from Donetsk Oblast. Thank you for this opportunity to join, because that's a very important topic. And I know that you are completing your discussion. I could see your agenda, and now I know that you have covered some general issues and specific ad hoc aspects, what needs to be monitored and analyzed. I am Roman Lozynskyi. I am an MP representing Holis faction, and I would like to focus not so much on criteria and how many criteria we need. I would like us all to ask this question: what for? Why do we need this monitoring and audit? Why do we need to hold it? I'm sure that this is the question that the specialized committee, parliamentary committee, needs to respond, and the parliament needs to address that, because further choice of criteria and methodologies will definitely depend on that. And my answer to that question, why we need that monitoring, me as an MP and a member of the parliamentary committee, specialized committee, who for 5 years has been dealing with local governance. I've visited actually all the rayons of Lviv, Ternopil, and Ivano-Frankivsk Oblasts. So I believe that we need to stimulate and motivate, not punish or impact the communities that have been amalgamated. I'm sure that all local councillors who will truly aspire to develop their communities, that after the 25th of October, they need to receive a checklist, as we had it for transparency and accountability of local government councils, but now it is for all aspects for development of the communities. And they need to subdivide that checklist into monthly plans, and they need to see that we have already met 3 of those requirements. We have information about budget enterprises, we have information about repair, we engage people, we have the video broadcast, and we see structure of the budgets. So in this way, all the communities can see how to improve those standards and the aspects that work, how to become better rating, how to receive additional bonuses in the form of additional subventions or payments that can also be included there, or as certain competitions or projects. So above all, the community needs to understand what efficient council or leader is for them. It should be done to motivate, to inspire, so that all the MPs work to develop their communities, and so that later it were possible to report on those particular items, on what has been done, what not, to avoid those long reports and presentations, because usually this is only about paperwork and reports, but we need to clearly follow the plans. Aspects of financial and economic center, humanitarian, public engagement sector, some youth development, and other sectors that communities often have no resources or wish to develop. I mean, not amalgamated communities, but local councils, or there was lack of understanding. So my only statement now is that it is very important to understand the concept of that monitoring, why we do that, and then we can address how to do that. We are very grateful to all the partners that stimulate parliamentarians for that discussion. I'm very grateful that there are proposals, suggestions, methodologies for expert solutions. We do not need to invent anything from scratch. That will speed up the efficiency. And me being the member of the specialized committee and as an MP representing Horus, I will insist on this approach, that we do not want to punish the communities, we do not want to make them do anything. We want to create these milestones so that the communities that need to control their councillors and leaders and local representatives, that they had an understanding of this action plan and could implement that. That will make it possible to follow who are populists and who work, and whether at the next elections it would be people would be ready to support this administrator. So it would be good if this information were in public access and motivated local authorities to work more efficiently, step by step, by addressing those problems and improving those indicators within those monitoring exercises and audits. I really hope that the Parliament will make the adequate decision to motivate and interest local communities for them to improve their indicators, to improve their efficiency, not just to prove anything from Kiev to anyone and to apply rather inadequate methods for that. So thank you all, and I'm sure that we will respond, we will address conceptual issues, and that we will quickly switch to using the best methodology, and we will implement it. Thank you, Roman, for this the call to protect the communities. And now we go back to efficiency, aspects of efficiency of local governance. This is what we try to separate in our discussion. So now we go back to that again. And now I would like to switch to the next speaker, who's going to speak about incentives, about how the monitoring system may incentivize the communities to develop. Norbert, Can we now switch here Norbert and see his presentation?
Colleagues in the Ukraine. It's a pleasure for me to speak to you today. I've had the pleasure to work in your country before, and I'm also very pleased to see that you are venturing into the topic of developing a performance management system. That has been established here in Kosovo, the place where I've been working for the last few years, actually about 8 years ago. And the foundations back then were also laid by an expert that still works in your DOBRE program, or that used to work in your DOBRE program, Mr. Barry Reed. But we built on that foundation in the last 10 years. So maybe this presentation allows you to have a look in how your performance management system can develop into the future. I have a presentation, I cannot see it. I hope that is visible for the viewers.
Ми бачимо.
Okay, I now go to the sheet, which shows you the objectives that the government in Kosovo had when they established the performance management system. And the first objective was actually to help the ministry to monitor municipalities. This was a legal obligation that the ministry has, it still has it, and the performance measurement tool was the instrument that gave them the data how they could monitor municipalities. But that was the perspective for the ministry. There was also more reasons are there for the municipalities themselves. First of all, by measuring performance and by measuring it the same overall municipalities in the country, we would motivate them to perform better. They would compare, and they still compare themselves to others. They even compare their own performance to previous years. So you kind of introduce a culture of performance. The other thing we try to achieve then is with making these data available about the municipal services, they could learn and they could depoliticize decision making, base it on facts and not on opinions. And that, the fourth reason, would lead to an improvement in the planning. And the last reason you see also, once you connect the data with financial figures, then you can also do very interesting financial calculations. How much does it cost us to include 3 new villages into our waste collection system? By now, these data are available, so municipalities can plan much better. These were the general objectives that we had for developing the performance management system. If we go to the next slide, the third slide, how does this performance management system itself actually look like, and what do we want to achieve within that system? First of all, we chose here for a standardized system all over the country. Kosovo was a lot smaller than Ukraine, so we could go for national coverage. It's still something I would advise to do in your case too, although it's definitely more complicated than in our situation. So we wanted one standard methodology for the whole country, which worked in all 38 municipalities, regardless if you're a mountain municipality or a municipality in the plain, if you're small or big, urban or rural. We wanted a system that produces reliable data and comparable data. And the last 2 things is that we agreed that all data would be published, and they're also discussed in the municipal assembly, and it's done on an annual basis. So for the last 10 years, we've been actually producing data sets for all 38 municipalities per year. And that has become a very interesting, rich source of information to base your policies on. Let's go to the next slide, slide number 4. This is about the structure of this performance management system that we have. In Kosovo, and also you will make the most important decision at the beginning, like what are we going to measure? Here we chose to measure only the own competences of municipalities. And this is the authority the municipality has to decide on certain services. That decision-making power should be 100%. And they also should finance that service 100% with their own financial means. We chose for that because we want to measure how well a municipality is performing. So we left out all so-called shared competences, where a municipality produces together with another administrative level a service, like, let's, for instance, delivering passports, which often is in cooperation with the Ministry of Interior. We left out that. What you see here on this slide is the 19 legal competences that municipalities have in Kosovo. For each of these competences, there's a number of indicators. It adds up to, at this moment, 120. And I will dive into the chapter, the field waste management, which you see here as number 14. And that's the next slide. So if we go into number 14, waste management, that would be called a field. And in this field, the next step we did is we developed the results we wanted to see within a certain period. Let's call it waste coverage of the territory. We wanted to go to 100% in several years. For that, next thing is we developed indicators. Per indicator, you need to know what kind of data you're collecting. Is it square meters? Is it kilograms? Is it people participating? You have to define the source of information. So where does the municipal official get the information to send the data back to the ministry? Can we trust that source? We standardized all the sources. And next to that, all the data are translated into a formula, through a formula, and that leads to a value and a percentage. The next slide gives this example for waste management. So here the abstraction becomes real. And what we see, for instance, is that within waste management, one of the results we want to have is including all citizens in the waste collection system. And for that, we collected a number of data. We collect the number of households which are in a collection system, in a routing from a number of trucks that go every month, but also the number of public institutions and the number of commercial institutions. In our case, we divide that by the total number of households, public institutions or companies, times 100 shows you the coverage of a waste management system in a municipality. And this can be compared then countrywide to every municipality. And like this, we have 120 indicators. It's very important to agree about the content of the indicators with the municipality themselves, because they will inform you the kind of data, the kind of documentation they have available to deliver the data. They know what sources are there, what they can produce. So it's very important to do this in an elaborate participative process. It lasted about a year for us. The next slide is about the accuracy, the collection and the accuracy of the data. It's important to make sure that the data are reliable and are fair. The way how we organize that in Kosovo is that, first of all, by law, every municipality is obliged to have a performance officer, and they have standard terms of reference of what they should do. They get the responsibility to collect the data within their municipality once per year. So they get the data from their colleagues. The performance officer goes out to the Department of Public Services, gets the data for waste collection, looks at the original source, confirms it's correct, signs the document, sends it to the mayor, who signs it to, who collects everything, and then it goes to the ministry. At the ministry, we have also a data verification level. And that means first the ministry compares the data coming in and sees if there are any outliers. Are some too high versus the average, or some too low? So there's some going back and forth between the municipalities. We do that for all 38. And then there's also a verification for the 3 top performers. So we look at those municipalities which are the best, and there we randomly take 20% of the indicators and really go back into the source in the municipality to check the data. And that is very important, because on top of the whole data collection system, we have put a performance grant. And that simply means the best performer gets a nice amount of money. And that amount of money is even a prize, in the sense that they can spend it how they want it within capital investments. It's the next slide. Because I see now the Ukrainian translation. So how does the performance grant work? Also, this is an annual system. And every year again, municipalities have to first qualify for receiving the grant. That means they must have reported all the data in the system, which we can see with a push on the bottom. Then there's also the obligation that they should have reviewed any law or any regulation that they made which was in contradiction with national legislation. We measure that. We want to make sure that they stay within legislation. If they did not do that, they disqualify. We want to have an audit report which is sufficiently good. In our case, unmodified, how it's called. We want to see that they spend 75% of their last year's budget, and they have to sign an agreement. Once they have fulfilled these 5 conditions, then they get into the competition. And then you can see in the next slide with the blue table, you can see that the performance indicators that we selected from the 120, because from the 120 we reduced that to actually 30 indicators, and they again are separated out into a chapter on governance and one on management and one on service provision. Meaning the majority of the indicators we measure for the grant are good governance indicators, because that allows you to compare everyone. From all these indicators, they can get a total of 100 points. And that assessment is done once per year. And that leads to a number of grants going to usually half of the municipalities. The next slide shows you a bit about the data. So the grant scheme is actually filled by a number of international donors, including the Kosovo government. So per year, it's about 5 million euro that is spent. And that represents, on average, 3% of the general grant that municipalities get every year. The grant they get for paying salaries, maintaining buildings, and doing some services. So 3% of that on top they get on average from this fund, which is already nice, but it's even better for the top 3 performers because they get extra funds. And for instance, this year, the top performer got 14% of its budget on top of the annual budget simply because of performance. So this is quite rewarding for municipalities right now. And the last slide is something I want to share with you, which is very new, that also international donors like this system a lot. The European Union made this year in its progress report for Kosovo, a specific mention of the performance grant, which is the sentence in blue in the bottom, where it says that the European Union is very pleased with the creation of the performance grant, which puts in place non-politicized rules for grant disbursement. They even encourage similar schemes for other line ministries. This was a good compliment for the ministry that we have worked with, and also for us to see that the work is appreciated. I hope that you in Ukraine can agree on how to go forward and use the information you received today in a good way. And I wish you lots of success with building the performance management system in your country. Thank you very much.
Дякую,
Thank you, Norbert. I really like the way you presented the system to incentivize the communities for them to perform better. However, I have another question that we discussed with you before. I would like you to mention that. What's the role of the Association of Local Governance in that process?
That has been a difficult role. And I think that will be similar for association in other countries too, even also in Ukraine, because in the granting system, there are, of course, winners, but there are also losers. So the association, because it represents all municipalities in an equal way, is not involved in the whole assessment of the grants. Because they do not want to be in a position that they distinguish between a good municipality and a bad one. They want to treat all their members equal, which I fully understand. We did make sure, though, that in the whole design process, the selection of indicators, the calculations, in this whole process, we involved the association and also representatives of municipalities intensively, because you should have the support. If the association does not support it, that is not good for the acceptance of the system by the municipalities itself. So to summarize, they were involved in the design, but they are not part of the assessment process. They leave that to the Ministry of Local Government together with some international donors.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Okay, thank you, Norbert. Thank you so much for your presentation. And unfortunately, well, we had another speaker planned and he cannot connect now. He has some internet-related problems, so we are going to wrap up now. I only wanted to make a couple of comments for, well, maybe we won't be able to answer all the questions within this roundtable, but we will try to respond individually, or maybe we will organize further discussions. But I dare say Tismanov adds important comments here. This is about the capacity of local governments and amalgamated communities to provide quality services. It's not only about budget capacity. To a great extent, this is a long-term effect of ongoing open dialogue of the authorities and the residents. And it is important to measure the quality of democratic procedures for local governments, the practice of local democracy, not only the number and content of regulatory documents on local democracy. And what's also important, and this is the only way how we can overcome those consumer-based attitude from back from Soviet times. So let me summarize then. Today we discussed a lot of important aspects. The topic is complex. Maybe we have not developed vision regarding all of these aspects. However, we can see that it is important to separate statistical data and efficiency measurement. We also discussed that this system, that it is important that it shows dynamics for development of communities and dynamics for development of the indicators. We also discussed that it needs to be reflected in the legislation, in the legislative framework, and that we need to proceed from statistical indicators to measuring the results. What's also important, an important aspect, as it was mentioned, it is about different dimensions, different measurements for different capacity communities. So thanks to all the participants, this was the first public event, but as DOBRE program, we plan to continue this discussion to engage local authorities, local governments, associations, academic community and central authorities to this very important discussion, so that the system that is going to be set up so that it met the realities and capacity of the community and stimulated the communities to develop further. Thank you for your participation.